This is the Triratna Dharma training course for Mitras. Compiled by Vedanya and produced by Sangaruchi. Music by Sarvadarshin. Hello, my name's Sangaruchi. This course is usually offered in Triratna Buddhist centres to small groups. I'm producing an audio version for anyone who can't get to a centre. Please listen to episode 1.1.0 as this gives an introduction. The course is narrated in text sessions, and in a subsequent question and answer session, I respond to anything people have sent me. Do send any questions. Year 1, Section 1, Week 6 of the Dharma training course for Mitras. (1.1.6) The Buddha we can contact. Introduction. In the last session, we saw that for many Buddhists, the story of the Buddha's life is not just a factual record of historical events. This week, we look at why, for most Buddhists, the Buddha is not just seen as a teacher who is now long dead, and who can therefore have no effect on us in the here and now. Imagining the Buddha and his qualities, bearing the Buddha in mind with respect, visualizing the Buddha, or some other manifestation of enlightenment, these are all important practices for many Buddhists, which have a definite spiritual purpose and a positive effect on many people. We may see these practices as an exercise in creative imagination, a way of developing qualities we are not in touch with in ourselves. We may see the Buddha we can contact in imagination and meditation as an aspect of our own potential, what is sometimes called our own Buddha nature. Or we may see these practices as a way to contact a powerful external stream of a spiritual energy. How we explain the positive effect of these practices may not matter, as long as we do not dismiss them out of prejudice or narrow-minded rationalism. In the presence of the Buddha. To understand how these practices develop, it might help to imagine what it would have been like to be one of the early members of the Sangha, living and practicing in the presence of the Buddha. What would it be like to spend time with the Buddha, to experience the influence and inspiration of such a highly evolved being? We can imagine that if we lived in the presence of the Buddha, we would be constantly reminded of the qualities of enlightenment, and our own potential for these qualities would be awakened and stimulated. We can imagine that as a result of his influence, these qualities would grow and strengthen, becoming a more powerful part of our being, while our more unskillful tendencies would tend to wither away. We can imagine that we would quite naturally come to act, speak, and think more like a Buddha. We can imagine that, over time, we would become more like the Buddha, in quite a natural way, with little apparent effort on our part. Many of the early Buddhists must have been aware that simply spending time with the Buddha had a powerful effect on them, and after the Buddha's death, they must have realized what they had lost. Inevitably, they would have tried to get some of the benefits of being with the Buddha, even though he was no longer physically present, and in this way, no doubt the practice of mindfulness of the Buddha developed. In fact, as we will see, this practice arose even before the Buddha's death, because not all of his disciples could be with him even when he was alive. But it was in the years and centuries after the Buddha's parinirvana that this style of practice really came into its own, becoming one of the most common meditation practices not long after the Buddha's death, and in the later forms of Buddhism, giving rise to many different forms of devotion, many different meditation practices, and many so-called archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, embodying different aspects of enlightenment. The benefits. According to the traditional commentaries, keeping the Buddha and his qualities in mind has many benefits. It gives us courage and the strength to rise above the suffering of living in this world. It leads to the fullness of faith and bestows wisdom and understanding. We come to feel as though we are living in the presence of the Enlightened One. And if we are tempted to act unskillfully, we are restrained by a wholesome shame, as though we were face to face with the Buddha himself. Over time, our body becomes as worthy of veneration as a shrine room, and in our mind tends towards the plane of the Buddhas. Even if this is as far as we get in this life, we will progress to a happy destiny. It seems to be a spiritual and psychological law that what we focus our minds on, we become. Focusing our mind on an enlightened being ripens our own potential for enlightenment, so that we gradually become more and more to dwell in the sphere of the Supreme Buddhas. An example from the time of the Buddha. The roots of the practice of recollection of the Buddha go right back to the time of the historical Buddha himself, as we can see from the following extract from the Sutta Nipata, one of the oldest surviving Buddhist texts. In this story, an old man called Pingiya is talking to the Brahmin Bharvari and praising the Buddha to the skies. Bharvari may be a bit put out by Pingiya's praise of this non-Brahmin teacher, because he asks him, "If this Gautama is so wonderful, why don't you spend all your time with him? Why aren't you with him right now?" Pingiya replies that he cannot be with the Buddha in body, because he is old and frail, so that he cannot travel with his teacher. But, he says, using the power of mindfulness and imagination, he's able to be in the presence of the Buddha all the time, so that in his mind he is never away from him. The Buddha then seems to speak to Pingiya, although physically he is many miles away, telling him that other people before him had been liberated by the power of faith or confidence, Shraddha in Sanskrit, Saddha in Pali, and predicting that Pingiya himself will gain enlightenment in this way, through this very practice. Pingiya's praises of the way to the beyond, from the Sutta Nipata, translation by H. Sadhatissa, pp. 131 to 133. "I will sing you the praises of the way to beyond," said Pingiya, when he returned to where the Brahmin Bharvari lives on the banks of the river Godavari. "It was described to us by this man exactly as he saw it, but then there isn't any reason why a man like him should lie. A mammoth of knowledge, and completely pure, a man without desire. When a voice has none of the glibness of pride, and none of the ingrained stains of ignorance, then its words are full of sweetness and beauty. It is such words that I praise now. They call him Buddha, enlightened, awake, dissolving darkness with total vision, and knowing the world to its ends. He has gone beyond all the states of being and of becoming. He has no inner poison drives. He is the total elimination of suffering. This man, Brahmin Bharvari, is the man I follow. It is like a bird that leaves the bushes of the scrubland and flies to the fruit trees of the forest. I too have left the bleary half-light of opinions. Like a swan, I have reached a great lake. Up till now, before I heard Gautama's teaching, people have always told me this. This is how it has always been, and this is how it will always be. Only the constant refrain of tradition, a breeding ground of speculation. This prince, this beam of light, Gautama, was the only one who dissolved the darkness. This man Gautama is a universe of wisdom and a world of understanding, a teacher whose Dharma is the way things are. Instant, immediate and visible all around, eroding desire without harmful side effects, with nothing else quite like it anywhere in the world. But Pingir, said Barbary, why don't you then spend all your time, your every moment with this man Gautama, this universe of wisdom, this world of understanding, this teacher whose Dharma is the way things are, instant, immediate and visible all around, eroding desire without harmful side effects, and with nothing else quite like it anywhere in the world? Brahmin, sir, said Pringir, there is no moment for me, however small, that is spent away from Gautama, from this universe of wisdom, from this world of understanding, this teacher whose teaching is the way things are, instant, immediate and visible all around, eroding desire without harmful side effects, with nothing else quite like it anywhere in the world. You see, sir, said Pingir, with constant and careful vigilance, it is possible for me to see him with my mind as clearly as with my eyes, in night as well as day. And since I spend my nights revering him, there is not, to my mind, a single moment spent away from him. I cannot now move away from the teaching of Gautama. The powers of confidence and joy, of intellect and awareness hold me there. Whichever way this universe of wisdom goes, it draws me with it. Physically, I cannot move like that. My body is decaying. I am old and weak, but the driving power of purposeful thought propels me with it without break. There was a time when, writhing in the mud of the swamps, I could only drift from one stone to the next, but then I saw Sambuddha, fully awake and free from defilement. Then the Buddha spoke. Pingir, he said, other people have freed themselves by the power of confidence. Vakali, Bhattavudra, and Alava Gautama have all done this. You too should let that strength release you. You too will go to the further shore, beyond the draw of death. These words, said Pingir, are the words of a man of wisdom. As I hear them, I become more confident. This man is Sambuddha. He has opened the curtains and woke up. There is nothing barren there. His mind is clear and luminous. Everything accessible to knowledge is known to him, even the ultimate subtleties of Godhood. There are no more questions for the doubtful who come to him. The teacher has answered them all. Yes, I shall go there. I shall go beyond change. I shall go beyond formations. I shall go beyond comparison. There are no more doubts. You may consider this as mind released. Questions for reflection and discussion. 1. Have you ever looked up to somebody as an example or role model? You could think of fictional characters and well-known people, as well as people you have known personally. What qualities did you particularly admire? Do you think you could have related to these qualities as easily in the abstract, without thinking of a person who embodied them? 2. Are there any qualities of the Buddha that you particularly admire or aspire to? 3. Try for a while imagining yourself in the presence of the Buddha or some other figure you admire. Perhaps bring them to mind as you meditate, or imagine that they are with you as you go about some daily task. What effect does this have? Tell the group about it. 4. Why might recollection of the Buddha give us courage? 5. Do you agree that mindfulness of the Buddha could be a useful practice? And how do you think it might work? How could you bring an element of it into your own practice? And 6. At the end of Pingia's praises, the Buddha seems to speak to Pingia, although physically he is many miles away. How do you interpret this?